Welcome to this tutorial. In this project, we are going to build a simple personal website, almost like a one-page portfolio, using React, NextJS, and TailwindCSS. The finished product is going to look like this. It's going to have header and footer elements and some content in the middle, and little project cards with thumbnails that we can click through to another page. We're also going to host this online for free, so that anybody with an internet connection will be able to visit it. This is a beginner level project, but you will need to know some HTML and CSS, and at least one programming language, for example, Python or JavaScript. The project will be written in TypeScript, but if you know at least another programming language, then you should still be able to follow along. It will also help if you are familiar with React and JSX, although I don't think it's essential. Here are the major tools we'll be using in this tutorial. You will need to have Node.js installed, so if you don't, please go to the nodejs.org website and install it first. That should also give you the npm command and the npx command, which we will use at the start of the tutorial to bootstrap the project. Don't worry about the rest of the dependencies for now, they'll be installed as part of the project later. Here is a tech overview of the project. The arrows indicate the direction of the dependencies. Don't worry if it looks complicated, we won't be dealing with most of this stuff directly. I only want to explain how our core technologies are related to each other. All the way on the right is NextJS, our core framework. NextJS works exclusively on top of React, so our project is really a React project as well. And underneath React is the Node.js JavaScript runtime. To use React, we'll need to know HTML in either TypeScript or JavaScript. To style the website, we'll be using TailwindCSS, which integrates into a Node project. With TailwindCSS, we'll be able to style the project without needing to write a line of CSS code at all. But it is still important to know how CSS works under the hood. I think this is a simple but also very powerful stack for front-end development in 2022, and let me explain why. First of all, React is the most popular modern web framework according to the latest Stack Overflow survey. You'll find many teams using it today, so it is a very good framework to learn. NextJS. It's not essential for a small project like this, but it does add some clever technology on top of React, which I really like. And it actually makes the project easier to develop than if we had just stuck with vanilla React. It gives us some nice things like easy routing out of the box, image optimization, and static page generation, which makes our pages load faster and generally better for SEO. Finally, TailwindCSS is a framework that lets me style my web elements directly in HTML, or technically the JSX. Using classes, I can add to my elements. Again, I included this purely because I think it actually makes developing this site easier and faster as opposed to using vanilla CSS. Maybe after this project you'll understand why as well. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started with our project. So I'm going to start now with an empty project, empty GitHub project. Inside it's just got the license and README, and in here the first thing we're going to do is create the NextJS project directory. So we can do that by going to nextjs.org and just looking at the documentation. This is the official website here. And then right at the top we have this getting started section. So we can run either npx or yarn, depending on what package manager you have. But if you just installed Node, then you probably will at least have npx. So let's give that a try here. npx create next app, and then I'm going to call it portfolio site, and we're going to do -- TypeScript as well because we want to use the TypeScript language. So we'll give that a go. And once that's done, we have this message here saying that we can go into this directory to see our project, and we can test it by typing npm run dev. So let's give that a try now. So if I go into this directory, I see there's a bunch of files created, and I can do npm run dev to start the development server and see a preview of the site. So it started the server here, and if I just open that up in my browser, we get this landing page that they've created for us as a template. Before we actually get started working on this, I want to install Tailwind as well for the styling of the project. So I'll go to the Tailwind css.com site here, and then search for onboarding instructions for NextJS. And here we have install Tailwind CSS with NextJS. Okay, so the first step, we've already done this with creating the next app. So we're going to go ahead to this one. And here we have to install Tailwind and a couple of other things and actually initialize Tailwind with this command here. So I'll copy that, go back to our terminal. I'll stop the server, Control C, and then I'll paste that Tailwind installation code. Once that's finished installing, I have to make a change to this folder as well. So add all the paths to your template files in Tailwind config. So we'll just copy and paste this. And we actually have to open our folder in here. So I'm gonna open this in Visual Studio Code, which is code. Okay, so I'm just gonna copy this section into this tailwind config.js file, which is here. Okay, and then after that, I have to add all of these Tailwind directives to the style global CSS file. So at this point, you don't have to know the layout of the project yet, just that we are following the instructions here. And I'll just add it at the top. And now it says we can run it. So if I run this again, then Tailwind should already be installed. Okay, and I can see our site here. To check that Tailwind's working, we can try their snippet, which is just adding some of these things to a piece of the text. So let me go ahead and copy that. And I'm going to modify this index page just to verify that the installation has been set up properly. So I'll add this hello world text into there. And I can see that it's up here and it's bold and it's a little bit bigger, which means that these Tailwind style directives are working. So just to compare, if I take all of that out, you can see that it just renders as normal text. Okay, so this pretty much is the installation setup we need for now, and we can actually get started with the project. Since this is a beginner level tutorial, I'm gonna quickly go over the structure of the project and some key things we need to know about React and about how this whole project works. But if you already know or have experience with React, then feel free to skip this entire section. So first of all, this is our project as I opened it up in our editor. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so you can see some of the files here. This project was created for us by the NextJS installer. So this just comes out of the box. And if I close off everything, we can see that we have a couple of directories. Two of them are ignored. So this contains a lot of the dependencies our project needs behind the scenes, but we don't really need them. So if we delete them and we build the site again, these things will be regenerated. So keep that in mind. You don't want to commit these to your Git repository. Then we've got 3 directories here. One of them is for the CSS styling. One of them is for images and other public files that we want to upload with the site. Finally, we have this one here, which is for the actual pages themselves. So what I'm looking at on this side from our development server, this is actually this index file here, which will take place in the root URL of our server. We also have an API section here, but we're not covering that in this tutorial, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that right now. We've got a couple of other configurations here as well. Some of them is for NextJS, and then we saw the one for Tailwind earlier, and this one is for TypeScript, how we want to configure TypeScript. So hopefully when we create this project, we don't have to touch any of this stuff. And this package.json shows us what dependencies we have in the project at the moment. So here we've got Next, we've got React, and we've got React DOM. So in this project, this is a Next.js project, and Next is built on top of React. So we will predominantly be using React technology to write this, but Next does help us do a couple of things better than React does natively. And we've also got Tailwind CSS here as well for our styling. Now, if we also go back to our pages over here, these will be the things we will edit to create the site. So if you can see here in the template, it says, get started by editing pages index.tsx. So a tsx file is a TypeScript file that it has this funky sort of HTML part in it here. So it's kind of like a mix between TypeScript and HTML. And it's pretty much what we will write to render this kind of thing on the screen. So the way this works is the React application or Next on top of it will pick each of these pages, these files we have in this folder, and create a page out of that here. So for example, if I just make a new file here, I just copied pasted that, and I'll call it new page. And in here, if I just empty this entire thing out and just make it return something like this, I'm just going to delete everything. So this is a very simple page here, and if I just rename that to new page, now I can go to that URL, I'm going to see that it renders this line that I've written here. So the way you can think of these files is that they map to different paths that you can visit in the browser for the server. Now, about the structure of this page itself. So this is what we actually call a React component. Pretty much every displayable element or anything that appears on the page is a component of some kind, including the entire page. We can make smaller things into components as well. For example, we can make a little component that's a piece of a menu or just a button, or components can be very big things like entire chat boxes or application dashboards. We can also put components into other components or create them as part of a loop, for example. So that's going to be the building block we use for our site. So this is a component. In this case, the component itself is just a function that returns an HTML element. Technically, this is actually called JSX. So it's basically HTML that's kind of embedded in this TypeScript file, but we can program it so we can add in variables and stuff like that. It's kind of like programmable HTML. But if you know HTML and CSS, you can pretty much write everything in here as if it was regular HTML. Also, when I'm running this as a development server, this is on a hot refresh. So if we go back to our terminal, we can see that it's recompiling every time our file changes. So as I'm editing this, I can sort of see changes in real time over here. This weird notation over here, if you're not familiar with TypeScript, this is how we can declare a function as a variable. We can also create functions just like in regular JavaScript like this, new page. And this would be a valid function as well, and we can actually do something like this. But doing it this way allows us to actually treat it like a first-class citizen as a variable and then return it this way or do other things with it. Finally, each TXX module needs a default export, which is if we import this file from another file, which function or which object is the thing that it will reference. So here we basically just export our main component that we declared up here. I think we're ready to dive right in and get started with this project. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this new page that I created for demonstration. I'm also going to delete this entire index page here as well. So now we have an empty project. I'm also going to delete the CSS style that we have for the home module. We're not going to use that because we're going to style it with Tailwind. Save. This is an empty project, and then I can delete this home module CSS as well. Okay, so now our project is really empty, but that's what we want because we want to write our own stuff. I made a quick sketch here for how I want the site to look. I'm going to have a name here and then a title. So this is going to be like a personal site, and then some contact details like a mobile number, text introduction paragraph, and maybe a couple of cards for projects for this person, like a CV style. So this could be a list of different projects that you can click on, and then a footer element that has some social media buttons as well. So this is kind of like my goal. So with that in mind, let's get started first. Let's create some of the content that's going to go here. So just to keep things simple, I'm going to start by just making everything into a div, and then we can change it up later. So I've got my name here, a title, got this text, don't need this. Okay, now that I've filled that in, I've got some of my text elements here, which it still doesn't look or behave like my goal, but at least I've got some of the divs in place. Something I like to do when blocking out the sites like this as well is just add a style to the div so that I can see some kind of border around it like this. But if I just delete all of this default HTML, I'm going to add a new one here. And even though this is a CSS file, we can use Tailwind directives in here by using this apply command. For a div, I want to apply a border around each element. So in Tailwind, we basically just pick the style we want and write the name of that class. So if I search here and I search for border, I can see that there's a couple of different directives like border color, and then here are the names I hadn't used to change the border color, or basically there's examples as well, so things like this. So here I want a border around each div, and I want it to be a color that stands out. So we'll actually just copy this snippet here and add it to our CSS and see how that looks. So back to our site, we can see these big borders around our elements now. So this helps me visualize what we're actually building. Okay, so going back to this, before I style it, I want to actually break this up, because if I write the whole site in this one return function, it's going to get really big and messy quite fast. So I want to break it up into different sections, and I can do that with components. So let me create a new folder in my project. I'm going to call it components. And I want that to be at the root of the project. And here I can create a footer component, maybe a header component, and then this introduction and this projects here like that. So let's start with the footer. Going to copy my footer element from here. And then I'm going to go back into this one and use it here. So to do that, I have to actually import it first. And once I've imported, I can actually use it as if it was another JSX element like that. So it's got its own tag, and it doesn't have any arguments, so I could just write it like that. And now I have it back here. I'll go and do that for the rest of this as well. So I'll create a header element, just copy paste that. And then I'll copy and paste this stuff from here as well. And just like the footer, I'm going to import it and use it in this index file like this. Okay, so even though I've removed content from this page, I still have it looking the way I wanted on this screen here. Next, I'm going to take these sections and make them into a profile element as well. So one more element. Okay, so now I have these three things as a component, which is nice. I'm not going to turn this section itself into a component, but I will create a component for this one project thing here, which I want it to be a button that shows like a snippet of the project, and we can click it and it'll take us to another page. So I'm going to call this component a project preview. So let me go ahead and just copy that. Okay. I go back to my index and I should be able to do this. I have to import this as well. Okay. So now I've structured my file into something where each component, I can work on it individually. So this will make the code cleaner, but also it will allow us to reuse each of these things separately, which is the advantage of doing this rather than all in one file. Now what I want to do is improve this placeholder content and style it up a little bit more so we can get a better idea of the site looking the way we want. I'll start with this header here. So the way that Tailwind works, as we saw earlier, is we basically go through the documentation and pick a style that we want to apply. For example, here I want to make the text bigger and maybe bold as well. So I can look for text sizing, or here, typography, font size, and I click it, and then we get these names, these classes we can use in this div, and it will apply a style to whatever is inside this div. So for example, here it applies these kind of styles. It changes the size, changes the line height, and we can see examples of it here in the Tailwind documentation as well. So that's essentially how it works. I usually just have this on the side, and then I'll search for something I want to do, whether it's a style or a color or a size, and then I'll usually get a class name that I can write into the div here. And if you search the extension marketplace for Tailwind CSS, you also have autocomplete and IntelliSense for it. So as you're typing, you'll get recommendations for different style names. So let's give that a go now. Back to our site and change the colors and some of these sizes to make it look better. First, I'm actually going to make this border a little bit thinner, just so it doesn't clutter up the whole space. So for the header, I want the text to be fairly big. So I'm going to choose 2XL. Now it's a little bit bigger, and that's nice. I don't think I want to make this title as big, but I want to change the color of the font. So I can do text gray 500. And this makes it a slightly lighter color. So the way this works is, again, these are color codes that we can specify from Tailwind. If I choose color here, I see text color. And there's a bunch of different colors we can choose. So the lower the number, the lower the suffix number, the brighter it is. And the higher the number, the darker it is. So we can see some of the examples here. There's different grays, different types of grays, neutral gray, stone, reds, yellows. So you can refer to this for the exact color you want. Also, I can change the weight of the font as well, but it's actually under a font bold directive instead. So if I write this is the class name. So now I have text 2XL with a bold font, and then this one here with a gray color. Looks a little bit better. For the profile section, I probably want something similar. So I want this hello world to be a little bit bigger. Maybe this can be bold as well. And this one, maybe I wanted to give it more of a feature color. So maybe something like purple or indigo. Let's try purple 600 here. So we're trying to brand the site. Also, it's good to pick like a strong primary color or secondary color to use as the style. And for this part under here, I do want to just make it a little bit, like I don't like using black as font color directly here. I think just like dark gray will look slightly better. In fact, instead of doing it one by one here for the colors I don't want to be black, I could actually apply a directive to the entire project, and everything else underneath will inherit that unless I override it specifically. So if I go to the index here and I just put this on the actual div that holds everything, I might be able to change all of the text at once. So I'll pick slate 700, which is kind of like a dark gray, but it's still a bit lighter than black. So I think that looks nicer. But our purple and our light gray is still unchanged because we apply that and it overwrites this one here. And that's just how CSS works. Now this blah, blah, blah line here, even though I don't really care about the content of the text at this point, I do need a bigger body of text so I can get a feel for how the site is looking. So for that, there's a sort of like a Latin placeholder text. I usually type in lorem ipsum, and that's the first 2 lines of this paragraph, and it's basically a bunch of Latin words that people like to use as placeholders in designing websites or text typography in general. So we're going to use that here. If you just type it into Google, you just basically get a bunch of generators. You can just copy it directly. I'll do something like that. Okay, so now I've got a paragraph in here. And this one, we'll get to this one later. I don't think there's much we can do here at this point. And this one as well. Now, I do want it to look good on mobile, so I have this screen quite small on purpose, but it can also look really ugly if we expand it out, and it's sort of all to the left like that. So before we do more things with the text, I want to just focus on this layout element. I also kind of want this to be in the center of the page. I'm going to achieve that by actually creating a layout component that wraps all of these things, so it's going to sit inside this. All of this stuff is going to sit inside my layout component, and I can do it like this. It's just a new component, call it layout. And the way I can put other elements inside this is that if I accept props as a parameter, basically all components are passed in some kind of props, which is, you can think of them as parameters. But the other ones, we didn't use any parameters, so we can leave it empty. For this one, we do want to use it. And by default, most React components will get a children key. The props children key is passed on to pretty much every React component, as far as I can tell. And if we access it, it basically gives us whatever is in between these tags. So if we use it as a JSX element, whatever we put in between these tags is accessible to this component via props.children. So let's try that out first. I've got my layout component here, and I am actually going to wrap my whole index page in that. Like this. Okay, so now I can see that it looks the same, but it is in fact being wrapped in the layout. So now I can change the layout and hopefully get the page looking the way I wanted. Probably don't need 2 layers of divs in this one. So first of all, I want to give this a maximum width. I don't want it to go beyond a certain size, and I want it to be quite small. So I'm going to type max width small, and then you can see here what that actually translates to in terms of CSS. So this is fine for me. Okay, so now even on the big screen, it is quite narrow, which is what I want. But I also want it in the center. So to do that, I'm going to create another div to wrap this into. And I'm going to make this parent div full screen height like this. Big container is the size of the screen, as we can tell by our red border here. I also need to make this a flex box. And now I can center this by making it have margin auto. Okay, so now my element is sitting where I want it to. I also probably want to center some of these elements here, like this footer here, just because I think in this kind of design it looks better if it's centered in the middle rather than aligned left. Although I think big body of texts probably look better left aligned still. So let's give that a shot. Yeah, we've got another Tailwind class here, text center, which will put our text right in the middle. And I think I might actually apply this to my header element as well. So let's make this smaller again now that we know it's well centered. And I'll do it up here. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Now I think all my elements are still a little bit too cramped. They're sort of all cramped up against each other. So I want a little bit of spacing of gaps between them. So I'm going to apply another flexbox on top of this, but I'm going to make it a vertical one. So objects are spaced out from top to bottom, and then I can set a gap between each element. So let's go back to where we have each of these elements. This is what I want to split out. And I'm going to say flex. If I just do that, it's going to try to put them in a row, which obviously not what we want. So we want to do flex column. And this sets the direction back to this vertical column. But now we can do gap. Let's try gap 4. So these numbers, the bigger the number, obviously, the bigger the size. 4 doesn't mean 4 pixels here. It's just like it's ordinal, but it doesn't actually correspond to anything. For here, it actually means 16 pixels. So they worked out some of these numbers to, to be able to design lots of visually interesting elements without you having to specify the exact pixel number. So if I press gap 4, now it looks a little bit more spaced out, which is nice. I'm actually going to turn off my div highlighting for now. Maybe I'll turn it back on later when I need it. So now we can see this is the way it looks. I also want these lines as well, these lines to separate my element here visually. I think it will look good. So let's try to put that in. The way I'm going to do it is add one to the header at the bottom, and then I'll add one to the footer at the top. So here's my header element. I can do that by typing border, which will create a border width of 1 pixel. If I type that now, it creates it around the whole thing. So I can specify just bottom by doing border-b, which is just the border bottom. It's a very light color though. We can actually change the border color by typing border dash and then picking our color. For example, if I do border black, it's quite dark like that. But actually, I kind of like a lighter color, so I'm going to do a slate 300, which is kind of like a grayish color. I also want my elements a little bit more margin from the border, so I'm going to do a padding. Maybe I just do general padding 4, and that would look good as well. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. And I'm going to copy this entire style actually. I'm going to apply it to the footer. Do this. Except I want this one at the top, so I'm going to do border top, border T, like that. Okay, I think that looks a bit better. I'm going to actually increase the gap. Like we still have a lot of space at the top and the bottom, so I think that we increase the gap, it just spaces things out a little bit more and looks nicer. And then this one, I don't want this to distract too much attention, this sort of footer node that we have here. So I want to also make this a lighter color. I'll do 400. Okay. So that works better for me. Now let's go ahead and add our contact elements to the header as well. Let's go back here. Back to this header, and I'll just make another div, and this could just be a fake mobile number. Like that. But this is a little bit too big for that, so I'm going to make this actually a small size with the text small. Okay, so I think that looks a little bit better too. I might want two elements for this though, because I might want an email as well. So let me go ahead and copy that and make an email. Now I'm going to do this so I can put these on the same line. If I do class name is flex. Okay, so now they're on the same line, but they're stuck together and this is not centered, so we can fix that. We can do justify center, and we can also do gap, maybe 2. Okay. Now this element starts to look pretty good, but I'm kind of repeating some of these directives here. So let's see if I can just actually apply this to the top level, and I don't have to keep repeating myself here as well. Okay, that's pretty good, but it does overwrite my styling for this one, so I'll have to be assertive about that again. And then I'll do a text slate, maybe 800 for this. Stick to 700. Yep. I can put text small up into this parent element as well. So now I just have these two divs, and then that's my style for this header. For the project element, I'm going to create a card with a header and some description, and then maybe also have an image. So let's give that a shot now and see what that looks like. First of all, because I'm going to have several projects or several project elements here, I can't hard code these values. What I'm going to have to do is actually make these variables and then use them in here. So let's do that. So this is how I declare a variable in TypeScript. This is the type, this is the name of the variable, and this can either be const, which means it's a constant and it can't change, or it can be let, which means it can change, but I recommend using const wherever possible because immutable variables are usually better to work with than ones that can change. So I'm gonna write this, make up a fake project, data analysis app, this. Then I'll write a description tagline as well. Something like that. To use this in JSX, we can just use it directly, but if I do it like this, you see it actually just writes title because it takes this literally as like the word title and not the variable itself. So to use the value of title, I have to put it in curly brackets. And now it says data analysis app. Okay, so that's perfect. That's what I want to do. And I will also have a description here like this. Okay, so this is my project element. Now I can style it a little bit. Maybe I'll make this item bolder, and then I'll make it so that it looks like it's clickable. And then I'll put an image as well. So first, let's make this one bolder. And the style for that is font bold. Remember, if you want to know what fonts are available, just have Tailwind handy here and then just search for different styles or different things that you want to do. And they have great examples. So now it looks bold. I probably also want it to be underlined. So I can just type in underline like this. Here, okay. It doesn't look like it's clickable though, like nothing's happening, so I'll have to actually make this an anchor link element. So I think I might need an href as well, so for later on when I want actual URL I can go to. Right now it doesn't do anything, so it just links back to itself. Okay, so now my cursor changes because I can actually click on it to go somewhere. If I click on this though, it just goes to the same page, which is fine because we don't have any other pages yet. But I do want it to change color when I highlight it, just to make my app feel a little bit more interactive. So with Tailwind, we can do that by using these modifiers like hover. And if we add this basically in combination with any other style, it applies that style only when hover is true. So I can, let's say I want to make the text purple like this one. When I hover, I can use that same style. So text indigo 600. And that will only happen when I hover over it. So here, that's how it looks. To add an image, firstly, we have to put the images into this project. So for that, I use the website called Unsplash, unsplash.com, where you can find free open source sort of stock photos you can download and use to mock up in your site. So I've actually used this one and found a couple of images, and I have them here. So I'm just going to copy them into the project. And where you want to put the images in a project is in this public folder here. So these will also be published with the site, and they will make the images accessible to your site and your customers. So I've got a couple of different ones, and I'll just pull it into the public folder. So now I have them. So the images look like this. Just things that I want to use for the site. And I got all of these from Unsplash. So please check the README for the credit for whoever took these beautiful photos and made them free to use. And now to use an image, we can go back to the Next documentation, and there is a menu here with a bunch of their features. So this is one of those things that Next makes it really easy for me to do over basic sort of vanilla React, which is one of the reasons why I really like using it, is that creating images is really easy. They have these FAQ here, and then this item, this next/image. This image component they give us, we can put our image in here, but it also helps us optimize the image as well, so that when the page loads, it's at the right size. It doesn't change the layout of the page too much, because that's really annoying when you load a page and then it's like the layout is shifting because images are loading in. It's quite a bad experience. So the more sort of static your page is when it's loading images, usually better. But first, let's just import this and see what it looks like. I have to put in this source property, which is, it can be a statically imported image file, which we can import like from here at the top of the file, or it can be a path string to an external URL or to an internal path in here. So let's try that. Just gonna put this image here like this. And now we need source, and I'm just gonna put it as our path. So I believe we can, I believe the public path is already the root of this, whatever we put here. So I think I could just do dash, let's see, coding.jpg, which is this file that I have here. And I don't know if that's gonna work. I'll try and refresh it. Okay, so if we have a path, we must also use width and height properties, or layout equals fill. I think we could probably do that. So if I look back at this, I can see the different layout options they have. And this is the default one, but we can't use this. We either have to fix it to a certain height and width, or we can fill it and it will grow up to fill a container. So I want to do that. I want to fill this div container of this image here. So let's go back and have a look. So it's actually filled up the entire page. And if we go back to the documentation, it says that the parent element has to have position relative in the style sheet. So I can just do this with Tailwind as well. Class name and then relative is a kind of a shortcut for me, and it will apply this CSS, which is what we need. So if I do that now, and go back to the site again, well, it's completely gone because this div itself doesn't really, it's tiny. It doesn't have any width or height either. So let me try something different and actually assign a width and a height directly to this. So it's a square. Okay, so now it shows up and it's contained within this square. So now let's fix the layout a little bit. Let's have the image as a little thumbnail here on the side, and then we'll have these buttons we can click sort of just floating off on the left over here. I'm going to do that by creating a flexbox firstly for these two elements, the image on the left and then this on the right, and then I'm going to put these into its own div. And I don't know if I need a flexbox for that. So here is where I'm actually going to turn on my grid again, because I think it'll be helpful. This image is a little bit too big. Maybe smaller. Okay, and now I want this vertically centered, because you can see there's a bit of a gap element here. So to do that, I think I just have to set this margin to auto. But I just want the y-axis centered. So I'll do margin y auto. This just does top and bottom. Okay, so now this is centered here, but I also want a bit of a gap from the actual image edge itself. So I'll do margin left. Or you know what? I can probably just do it with the flex box here as well. I'll just do gap 4. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. So let's actually turn our borders back off and see what that looks like again. Okay, I think this looks better. So I'm quite happy with the way that's looking. I want my link to actually lead to a different page when I click it here. So if I click it, at the moment, it just goes back to the same page. So I want to create a new page called Data Analysis App. And I want this to take me to that page when I click it. So again, Next.js makes this really easy for us. And this is probably one of the main advantages I like it over using React on its own. It's actually simpler to use Next.js with React than to use React on its own. And I think you'll find a lot of similar feedback from other developers as well, is that to link to a page, all we have to do is create a new page under this folder, pages, and that will automatically become a new page in Next already. But we can link to it very simply by just using this link component that they give us as well. So you can already see the example here. We just have to wrap our anchor elements with this link and then the reference there, and it will take us to that page. So let's give that a try. First of all, we need to create a new page. Before we can link to it, we actually need this page to exist. So this is going to be called Data Analysis App page. Let's go ahead and create that. And now my page is, I want it mostly the same. Wait, hold on. Let me just change the name of the component first. Okay, I want it mostly to be the same, except probably don't want these elements, and then I want something about my app here. Okay, so let's actually go to this URL and see if it's there. Okay, so now we have a new page. I'm going to expand this so you can see the URL. So my URL is not the root localhost URL anymore. It's this data analysis page, and I have this new page here already. But kind of what annoys me is that this whole layout and header and footer thing, we've kind of duplicated it. So if anything changes, like for example with this thing here, it's not going to be great. So what Next.js actually does is, you might have noticed this _app component here. We can't access this directly on the page, but it's actually a component that wraps every component that appears here. If we want to apply something to components across all components of this website, we can do it in here instead. So let's do that now. I'm going to take this layout and this header and this footer out of the index and out of this data analysis, and I'll put it in this app, this common app file. So it will simplify these components for us too. So I'm going to, I'm going to just remove everything. I'm just going to turn this into an empty div first, like this. And then I'm going to remove all of this stuff here. Okay, so now my page is back to just being very basic. But then I'm going to take this entire layout that we wrote up and then wrap what we're returning here with that. So copy that first, and then I'm going to just put this in the middle. Okay, so we'll have the component, and it's going to be wrapped with our header, our footer, and our layout, and we're going to return this entire thing there. But we have to, it's going to break because we have to import these things as well. So we'll just import all of these things. Now we refresh that, and my layout is back to the way it was. And if I go back to the index page, I actually, it's going to look pretty funky because I have the layout within the layout. So I'll have to delete the version of the layout from the index page itself. So I won't need these anymore. I just have the profile and the project preview element. Well, they have to be inside a div. Okay, so now that's looking pretty good. I lost my little padding, my margin up here between these two elements because they're not part of that flex box anymore that we created earlier with the gap. So I'll just have to add that in manually here for now. Margin top 4. Okay. Now let's apply the link to the other page that we created here. So if I go to my project preview, I've got my link here. Again, I want this to eventually be a dynamic thing that I pass in because I want several versions of these. So I'm going to create a link, I guess URL variable, and I'm going to make that, what do we call it? Data analysis, this one here. And now I can use this NextJS link component with a href here to route to that location. So I have to wrap my anchor element according to this example. That's what I have to do. And that's how the routing will work. I probably can take this part out. Then make sure that I import it. Okay, so I want this URL instead of this thing here. That. Okay, let's go back to our site, and now it works. And I'm probably going to want a back button here as well, so I can go back to my main site. So in my data analysis page, probably also want to have a back button. In fact, I'm gonna actually just copy this entire thing because we're gonna want it to have a link as well. So we do that, then just do this here. Import the link. I don't need this to be a variable because it's just gonna go back to the index. And then I need to change, I'm gonna hard code this as well to the word back. Okay, so now this works. Now I can go back and forth between my pages. Do want to give this guy a little bit of space though. Just so it's a little bit, so we have some more space here. Obviously, writing about the project probably is going to have a bit more of a body as well, so I'm going to add that Latin text to this thing too. Okay. So now we're starting to block it out a little bit more. Probably also want the main image showing up at the top. So I'll go ahead and do that as well. So I'm going to show you the other way we can import images now. We saw before we can do it from a direct link, but then we had to add in the fill or the size options so that the page would know how to block it out. But if the page already has a copy of this image locally, it can do some of that work without having to, having us to specify that. But we have to import it like an element here. So I can write it like this. I can write project image from, and then basically just my image path. So that would be public. Then the one we used was coding.jpg. So if I, instead of a URL link, I can just put this object directly, and now it'll let me do that without complaining about the size and things like that. Now give this one a little bit of a space as well. Spacing is very important when you're designing a website. Okay. So I think this looks pretty good. So I've got a little projects demo here, and then when I click on it, I get the full page with a bigger image, and I can also go back. I really like that VS Code supports TypeScript and I guess especially React development pretty well. You can see here out of the box by default, it will gray out for you imports you don't need. So to clean up your project, you can look at whatever is grayed out, and you could just sort of highlight everything and delete it. It should all still be the same. I'm pretty happy with the one project we have in our portfolio, but likely we're probably going to want several more projects here. So how can we do that with this component here without having to rewrite this a bunch of times? We've already taken a step towards that by extracting some of these values that we use as variables outside like this. But to use it For example, here at this level, we probably need to be able to pass it in as parameters directly from here. So I now want to make my project preview a little bit more generic so that this component can accept parameters and then render several project, I guess, little cards for me, depending on the data I pass in. We've kind of hard coded this for now. So in order to pass in parameters or arguments to a component, we have to do it through something called props. So typically, all our components so far, we haven't accepted, well, apart from layouts, we haven't accepted any props. They've just been empty. But for the project preview, we're going to put these as part of the props. The way we do that is typically I'd normally start by creating an interface for the props. It's just kind of like a class or a type for what elements we expect in here. So normally it would just be the name of this component with the word interface at the end. And this is, well, actually it's not a constant, it's an interface. So this is how we declare it. And then to use it, I can specify it by saying that this is a type of React functional component that accepts an interface as the props. And then I'll write props in here. So this will know that it's this thing. Alternatively, I think for this, I can also just do this. I can specify the names and the types of variables I want in my interface by just doing this here. So instead of basically having this as separate variables, I would just copy this sort of name and type into the props, and that's how I can specify it. And now to use the props, hold on, let me just comment this out. Now to actually use the props, we just type props and then dot, and then we have our elements here. And also what's really nice, I guess, about TypeScript and using VS Code in general is that it's got this really nice autocomplete for us, which I'm not sure if it's available in JavaScript as well, because JavaScript doesn't have compile time checking. So sometimes it does a decent enough job, but a lot of the times I found that the TypeScript experience is much better because of little things like these. It's harder to go wrong. Okay, so now my project preview is using props to populate its information instead of this hard-coded stuff. So if I delete this and now I save it again, it's actually going to give me an error, because if I go back to my index page, we're going to see this is highlighted in red and it says all of these types are missing from our preview. So now that we declared it, we actually need to specify it as well. So if I just go to my control period here, I can add the missing attributes directly from the IDE, and it'll just give me blank entries for each of these things. I think it lets us run without an error, but then we don't have any of our details. So let's go ahead and pass that in. Okay, and now we're back to where we were. Actually, I also forgot, and we need to pass in this image as a props as well, because we don't want this same picture for everything. So I'm going to go ahead and do that too. Okay, so that works. Now I have my project preview as a generic component, and I've got my data on the outside on this index page here. This opens up the possibility for me to create multiple of these components and populate it into this element here instead. So let's go ahead and do that and see what it looks like. First of all, I probably don't want 4 new variables for each of my projects. So I want this under one object, and I can do that if I actually import that project preview interface that we created earlier here. but we can't access this from this file because we're not exporting it. Unlike the other ones here that we're exporting, if I try to import this or try to use this, it's going to give me an error. So here, if I actually try to import it, it says it doesn't have an exported member called project preview interface. And we can fix that by just putting export in front of this interface. And so now we've got this object here. We do need to fill in all these mandatory fields. Now I can use this interface as my data object instead of these 4 variables. So I'm just going to copy everything over. And I can delete these. Each of these variables are red because I don't have them anymore, so I need to use this one instead. I could do something like this here. I think this would work as well. So pretty much brute force. But then it's kind of quite repetitive. So what I can do instead is just put in the entire object like this. And the reason I need these 3 dots instead of just, I think if I just put the object itself, yeah, this just doesn't work because we don't want the actual interface object as the child here, but we want each of these fields separately as input to this thing. And that's how it works. So using the spread operator, it's kind of like the keyword arguments in Python, or the asterisks in Python, which breaks up a list or a dictionary into its separate elements. So that's kind of like the same thing that's going on. This breaks it up and actually submits these as individual fields instead of one object containing these fields. Now actually, let's create some data for a couple of different projects and put them in a list so that we can see how to generate a similar list in the interface. So first of all, I'm going to make a variable to hold all of these different metadata. So project metadata array, that's just going to be an array. Even though this is a constant type variable, it's fine. We can still add things to the array because constant just means that we can't reassign this value, but we can actually run operations that this thing is capable of. So we can remove and add things, but we just can't reassign this variable. And now I'm going to do project metadata push. Push is pretty much the same as append in Python. Push this object here like this, and I'm going to get rid of this one now. But because I don't have this anymore, what I need to do instead is create a loop to go through this metadata, and for each metadata generate this project preview and then put that into a list. So let me try to do that here. I'll be project preview elements. That's also going to be a list. And that's what I'm actually going to render here instead. So let me just copy this out. And I'm going to just put it in a comment here. And this is what I'm going to decide to render here instead. So now I'm going to loop through each of these. And there is a way to write for each loop in TypeScript, but I'm just going to use the standard notation because I feel like that's probably familiar to most people. So we're going to loop every element here, I from 0 to the length of this metadata array, I++. And I'm going to take the metadata. I'm going to take each metadata and create a project preview element out of it, like this. So here's my data. And then I'm going to push this into my array containing all of my elements, like this. So this works. You can't tell anything's different here because we only have one element. But now if I create multiple preview elements, well, I've got a couple of pictures. I've got a picture of a headphone and one of YouTube. So I'm going to say here, sound processing app. Just fill in some information. So I've just gone ahead and filled this with some unique data for each project here. And if I save and run it again, I actually get, now I get a list of elements for each of these things. A detail you might notice, if you do anything that involves a list or element in JSX, if you look at the console, you get a bunch of errors here. Usually this one, each child in a list should have a unique key prop. So this is not visible to us just when we're writing it here, but this might cause problems later down the line. It basically says that if things are in a list, for React to know if it should update them, they all have to have a unique key that's different from one another. So we could just do that here by adding this as a key. And for this one, we could just use this number because that's going to be unique between all the elements. So if I do that again and rerun this, my error should be gone. Oh yeah, we don't have that error anymore. Now I'm just going to go ahead and style these project elements a little bit more just so they look nicer. I'm also going to try giving it a little bit of a light colored background just to differentiate it visually from the rest of the site. Okay, so now I've got my little previews working, but I've actually haven't created these pages. So I'll just go ahead and do that real quick. Okay, so if I've just sort of gone ahead and created different pages for these apps for us now, and I've hard-coded the names in here. But as you can see now, once everything's put together, I can go through each of these pages and it'll take us to a different page with this different image and title. And I can go back, and that's pretty much the functionality of my portfolio. Now, because this is sort of like a beginner level tutorial, I'm not going to go into how to fetch the data for these things separately yet, but what I do want to point out is that this way that we are doing it here, it's actually not very good because first of all, we have a bunch of data that we have to manually edit in the code, and if we need to change content for the site, such as projects or if these were blog posts, we probably don't want to be doing it in the code. We want the code itself to remain static and unchanged. So Next.js actually has a really cool feature for us called data fetching, and it's in one of their basic features here, which actually lets us extract all of this metadata from any file or any kind of source we want. It could be an external API, or it could be a JSON file or a text file inside our own folder, and then turn those into these metadatas and this text here. So I'm not going to do that right now, but if you're interested in that, let me know and I can make a follow-up tutorial on that section as well. That will allow us to not have our content data in the source code, and then we won't have to be creating these pages manually by hand as well and duplicating some of this information like the images and the title. Instead, we would just have a folder that had a bunch of text files in it or a bunch of images, and then the site would be smart enough when we build it to generate these pages statically for us for each piece of data. Finally, I think our project is starting to look pretty close to our design here. The last element is just this tiny little thing, which is like the social media icons that we want to put at the bottom. So if you're not sure how to implement this yet, you might be thinking, oh, we should probably just put an image here because we already did that for these things. And we could do that, but actually the way I like to do this is with a font. So there's actually special font sets or services where the glyphs of the font are actually little icons. And I think that's good because you can have lots of different icons. You don't have to deal with images, and the system's generally quite a bit better. The experience is better. But also because they're fonts, they're vector, which means that unlike a PNG or a JPEG image, they scale up and scale down in size and still look really sharp without getting blurry or getting sort of losing resolution from the sample. So the font package I like to use for this is actually called Fontawesome. So you can visit by going to fontawesome.com. And once you land on their site, there's a couple of helpful links to either download or to start using it. We want to use it with a React project, so we'll look for the onboarding instructions specifically for React. And here's just an instruction snippet for us already to get started using this. So I'm just going to copy this whole snippet. And I'm going to open up my terminal again. I'm going to leave my server running, so I'm going to open up a separate terminal on the side here and just copy that whole part. Install that into my project. Okay, so now this is done. I actually need one more package because if we look at our original design, this little thing at the bottom, we want it to be a social media icon. But the Fontawesome default icon package just has general things like arrows and user icons and things like that. So to get actual brand icons, we have to additionally install this free brands SVG icons here. So now our dependencies are installed, we can finally pick the icon we want. So if I go back to Fontawesome and then just search the icons, so now I can go and search Fontawesome for the icon I want. So for the social media profile, for example, let's see if it has a LinkedIn icon. And it does here, these ones. So we can click on that and look at it. And that one's pretty good. So yeah, I would like to use this one. Let's see what else they have. There's also a Discord icon, GitHub icon as well. So once we've seen the icons we want to use and the code for them, we actually have to import them into our component. If we go back to the React documentation and scroll down further, we'll see some examples of how we can use them. So firstly, we have to import them like this from here, and then we can create an element like this, a component, and then we just pass in this icon. So I'm just actually going to copy this entire snippet into our project and try that out. And I'm going to need the footer file, so I'm going to close everything else that I'm not using right now. It's getting in the way, and do it here. And then I'm just going to pop it under this footer text here. And there we go, it shows up. What's actually pretty cool is that the font itself inherits the font size of whatever div it's in. So if you put it next to text of a certain size, it should look pretty good, pretty fit to that text already. However, I do want this to be a bit bigger because I want it to stand out like a button that I want to click. So I am going to put it into a div, a separate div that has a slightly bigger font size. Text large, maybe a bit bigger. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. But once it's really big, it also draws quite a lot of attention to itself, so I want to fade it out a little bit as well. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Now this is just a generic coffee cup icon. I want this to be maybe like a GitHub or a LinkedIn icon. So actually I have to change this library first. And if we saw earlier, the brand library was called Free Brands SVG Icons. So let's change it to that. And it doesn't have FA Coffee in here, but instead it has a bunch of other stuff like GitHub. So we do that. And I can see that there's a GitHub font here now. I can also make this clickable the same way as I made another link clickable. We just make this an anchor element and then wrap it inside the NextJS link like this. Also, I need to provide the source for the link, so we'll just do the GitHub page. So once that's done, I should be able to access whatever link is here by just clicking this. So that just takes me to my page because I didn't specify a user here, but that's probably what you want to do if you're actually building this into a personal site. So now looking back at our original sketch of the site, I'm pretty happy with the way it's turned out. I think it resembles it quite nicely, and we've even got a bit of a color element going on. We can interact with it and get to different pages in the app. We did hard code a bunch of this stuff, but NextJS does have great features to let us automate some of that a little bit more, especially if this content needs to change often. As I mentioned, that's out of the scope of this project because this is a beginner project, so we will have to do that another time. But finally, to wrap this up, let's actually get this online, because right now it is on a local server. So let's say I actually want to publish this and make it accessible to the world. What's the easiest way to do that? So first of all, to host it, let's save our work and make sure everything's committed to GitHub. This should already be in a Git repository. So if we go back to the root site and then type git status, we should see that we have untracked changes. We'll just git add all files, and then if we look at it again, we can see all the new icons and images and content we've added. And I'm just going to commit that with a simple message. And I'll also have to push it to my remote repository. So the way that we can host it easiest usually involves having the site up to date in the GitHub, and then we can find a host that reads from that directly if the repository is public, and host that for us as a static website. So we don't even have to pay for a server. So now that my git push is complete, I'll check my actual GitHub repository here, make sure it has my code. So my portfolio site is now here. Now, I like to actually host my static sites on vercel.com. So Vercel is actually the developer of NextJS that we just used, this entire framework. And I think they do a pretty good job at providing hosting services as well. And it's completely free for hobby projects or non-commercial projects. So it's a really good deal. I've tested it, and the onboarding process is super fast, and the hosting is very high quality as well. Very fast load times and very reliable service. So let's go ahead and give that a shot. You go to vercel.com/new, and then it should come up with this page where it shows you some of your repositories if you're connected with GitHub. So you just go ahead and choose the one that we worked on here, this Next.js portfolio tutorial, and I'm going to import this. And here we have to select the root directory. So if you look at my project directory of my GitHub, I actually have this. When we created the project's portfolio site, it's actually created under a subdirectory in our GitHub. So I'll have to actually make this the root directory of my next project. So I'll copy this portfolio site and put it here. Oh, actually, yeah, it lets us just choose this from here. So it's identified that this is a next project, and we just select that and we continue. And I can also decide which I can also specify which framework it is here, which is obviously Next.js. And I should be able to just deploy it now. As it's deploying, we can actually read the logs of the build. So if there's anything going wrong while it's building, we can see and debug it directly from here as well. I actually got a failure in this deployment here. It says incorrect or missing password. So I'm going to try and debug this. So I debugged the problem by copying that error code into Stack Overflow pretty much, and somebody recommended to delete the package lock.json file. So I had to delete the entire file and then just commit that change to GitHub and rerun the deployment. And I think that fixes the issue. I don't exactly know why this causes it to fail, because I don't really know that much about the package lock.json or the way that the npm structures the package myself. But I think that we just have to ignore this if we want Vercel to be able to build the file for us and deploy it. So in this case, my deployment succeeded after making that fix. I can go to the dashboard to look at it. So looking at this on our dashboard, we see the state of the site, when it was created, the branch of the code, and we've got some domains here as well that we can use. So let's go and have a look at this domain. And it's created this name for us here. And here's the site. It's online, it's got the images, and I think the links should work as well. So this is now public. We've now reached the end of this tutorial. If you finished a project and have it hosted, then congratulations. If you got stuck along the way, then let me know in the comments and I'll try to help out. Either way, thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope you found it helpful.